On the 22nd of April, we sadly lost Scott Morrison following a tragic accident. Scott was not only a co-founder and host of the Backs to the Wall podcast, but he was a best friend to the three of us. We, like so many others, are totally heartbroken by his passing.
After speaking with his family, they have asked us that we continue the show in his honour, telling us how proud Scott was of the podcast and how excited he was to record every week.
We will all miss Scott dearly, but feel so fortunate to have so many happy memories with him. This episode, and everyone in the future, is dedicated to him. Rest in peace, Scott, and thank you for being the best friend that any of us could ever ask for.
Scott Morrison was born and brought up in the Scottish border town of Langham. Having gone through nursery, primary school and Langham Academy, it was time for Scott to make a decision on further education, and he chose Stirling. Initially studying journalism, Scott found that his true academic passion was in politics, and successfully made the switch to this field at the end of second year. Upon completion of his studies in June 2019, Scott returned home to Langham with bright hopes for his future. At the turn of the new year, Scott began to set out a plan which centred around staying in his beloved Langham. He intended on delving further into the family trade by taking over the IT side of the business, whilst also taking the garage and bike shop onto social media. The idea to settle in Langham for the foreseeable future stemmed from his dream of becoming the town cornet, which required a 3-year commitment in order to claim the illustrious title. In the more distant future, Scott had intended to use his degree to get into politics by becoming local councillor. Due to Scott's overwhelming popularity and his academic achievements, this role would have been easily attainable, as his fresh ideas and personality would be perfect for this position. In addition to Scott's career, himself and his family had planned to invest in a racehorse, which Scott wanted to train in the winter, and if good enough, race competitively in the summer months. Scott's talents did not solely lie with horses, as he was a household name around the border towns for being an extremely talented young bowler. Despite Scott's age, he bowled like a seasoned pro, picking up silverware throughout the bowling season, not just in Langham, but across the wider bowls circuit in lowland Scotland. It had been Scott's dream to perform in the championships in Ayr, and if his record in other competitions is anything to go by, he would have certainly made it. Scott's wider passions included football, rugby, tennis and golf, to name a few. On match days for the local rugby and football teams in Langham, you would often find Scott pitchside, cheering on the teams. Scott Morrison touched the hearts of so many throughout his life, from Langham to Stirling and further afield. The impact he has made on so many will live on forever, and we miss him dearly.
Welcome to the Backs to the Wall podcast. Four mates talking all things football, with some special guests and other sporting shenanigans thrown in as well. The podcast returns this week to pay tribute to our dear friend Scott. Like it says in the intro, this podcast is all about four mates talking all things football. It doesn't feel right without Scott, but we hope this episode might bring some comfort to everyone out there who misses him so much. We'll share some of our memories and have reached out to some of his friends who have done the same as well. So we talked about recording and starting our own podcast for quite a lot of our time at uni together, and we finally were able to a couple of months ago. We'd managed to record 3 episodes, and it was something we were all really enjoying doing.
I think one thing, we would never have started the podcast without Scott, mainly because of his sport and knowledge, which was far greater than any of ours put together. Like, it was ridiculous what he knew, and what he didn't know wasn't worth knowing within the sporting world. Like Michael said, the podcast was kind of jokingly suggested all throughout uni, and the lockdown just became the perfect platform to start it all. And we kind of didn't know what way it would go, how it would be received, but I think to our amazement, people were actually enjoying listening to the rubbish that we would normally chat every day about football.
Football and sport in general just became such a big part of our lives and the time that we spent with Scott, from our journeys to various football grounds across the country, from Tynecastle to Firhill to Ochil View in Larbert to Alloa. Scott was he loved the game, and it was just such a pleasure to chat football and rugby, tennis, golf with Scott. And although it was pretty difficult to get a hold of him for the podcast because of how busy he's been recently in Langham, it was well worth the wait because the podcasts were just so special with him in it. His knowledge is great, his banter. It's just difficult to talk about just in ways just now.
I think as well, it wasn't necessarily just his knowledge, but as well as that, the passion he had for. I remember the episode when we were talking about what was going on in Scottish football, with the vote and whatnot, and he was genuinely just so angry about it. Like he cared a lot about the game in Scotland.
Scott was a great important party thistle. It's never easy, but I took a lot of solace in chatting with Scott after most games. We used to sort of break down the games after. We talk about the players because although he wouldn't often be at the games because I would go every week, he'd still listen to it on the radio because that's what he'd do. Just on a Saturday afternoon, that would be his. He'd never miss it, and he just had such a love for all things Scottish football, and it was just this is going to be such a miss.
Yeah, it's so tragic what has happened. I mean, when you're just kind of talking about the podcast, I mean, of course, it's not just about the podcast, but this is something that we were kind of all four of us are so passionate about, and kind of even in the 3 episodes that we did, it just kind of built each one. I mean, I think each one kind of got better as it went on, and we were becoming more comfortable as each episode came in, and I think especially in the 3rd episode, you kind of seen Scott's his true self come out with his witty side and the banter coming across in the more funny episode that we did. But like I said, even in the more serious one, is how passionate he was about sport in general. I mean, you'd see him every time you would go over to his flat. There'd be bowls, snooker, golf, cricket, football, rugby, anything sport-wise would be on the telly.
And I've said this before and I'll say it again, that I've never seen somebody that knows so much about Football Manager and just never seems to be off it. I was chatting with his mum and dad, Tommy and Diane, last week, and we were having a little bit of a joke about how he would always sit in the evening times with his iPad in his lap, and he'd be sitting just so focused on winning every competition available in Football Manager. And I mean, myself, and I know that Andrew plays it a lot, but I've never seen anyone that quite had a passion for it and the knowledge of the game like him.
So while Scott was very passionate about his love for football, he was equally passionate about his dislike for certain teams and certain players. As part of our Send Him to the Reserves feature, we would vote every week on a certain player that had been poor either on or off the pitch, and there was a selection of players that Scott really just couldn't tolerate. Maybe this week we could send a few of those players to the reserves.
I suppose I'll kick things off then. I remember Scott had a distinct dislike for the Celtic winger James Forrest. In Scott's defence, when Scott came out and said that he didn't rate James Forrest at all, and that he thought he was so overhyped in the press and everything, he'd have his good games and his bad games, but once Scott seemed to say that, James Forrest just went from strength to strength, which made it so funny because you'd just watch, you'd go to the pub and the football would be on in the background and James Forrest would pop up with a goal and an assist and would always wind Scott up about it. And there was a particular Scotland game where we're at Scott's flat. James Forrest scored 4 times. So it was a running joke in the friend group that as soon as Scott basically mentioned that James Forrest was his ability was over exaggerated, he seemed to just have a great vein of form and has continued it up until the present day. So I used to enjoy having a laugh with Scott about that, and he still maintains that James Forrest is overrated, but he's definitely one that could be put to the wall on this episode.
This is one of the funnier ones for me. Like Jamie said, it was a running joke for quite some time. And we would often make the joke whenever Forrest would do something in a game that Scott would never make it as a scout in football after claiming James Forrest is this terrible player. He then went on to score about 15 goals 3 seasons in a row. And he would always claim that he was really poor in the final third and how bad of a player he was. But yeah, it was just so funny seeing how well he did after he made this claim, which was, like Jamie said in his defence, probably justifiable, but then he just went on this mad run.
I remember there was I think it was a Scotland game as well where James Forrest put in a couple of absolutely terrible crosses in a row, and Scott got up out of his chair and was like, see, that's what I mean. It's just great memories.
It wasn't just James Forrest that we had a history of disliking Celtic players, obviously in general. Did he not hate Stuart Armstrong as well?
The Stuart Armstrong one became more. It wasn't something that had been festering sort of within Scott for a while. It was one particular moment, and it'd be about 3 years ago now when Scotland were playing England, and Lee Griffiths scored 2 free kicks about 2 minutes apart in the game to put Scotland 2-1 ahead. And in the dying moments of the game, Stuart Armstrong had the ball about a third of the way in his own half. And if he'd blundered it up the pitch and out for a throw-in or up to the other goalkeeper, the full-time whistle would almost certainly have gone. But he decided to make a wayward pass up the right-hand side, and I can't quite remember now who the English boy was that picked it up, but he put a ball into the box, and a mistake it's debated between Charlie Mulgrew or Craig Gordon in goals, but Harry Kane, I think it was, popped up with the equaliser for England in the last second. So I think a lot of Scottish fans really dislike Stuart Armstrong after giving the ball away so needlessly in the dying embers.
I can remember him. He used to always say he would never be able to forgive Stuart Armstrong. Also hated Scott Brown with passion.
I think just about every Rangers fan go and dislike Scott Brown.
Scott Brown just I don't even know what to say, because if you're a football fan or a Scottish football fan, then you'll know that the Scott Brown goes out of his way to wind up opposition supporters, opposition players, and especially that of Rangers. And yeah, Scott really took a dislike to that. I mean, he had his spat with El Hadj Diouf, and he also had a few meaty challenges over the years, and I think he had a part to play in Alfredo Morelos getting sent off. He also was on the receiving end of a Ryan Kent punch last season. So it just shows the general animosity that goes towards Scott Brown from Rangers fans. And I think it can be quite justified, because he does tend to be a bit of an arsehole, Scott Brown. So he's got a good case there to go to the wall this week as well. And Scott really, really disliked Scott Brown.
I think one thing that I remember is like talking in previous episodes, because one thing about this segment is putting players to the wall of either generally bad footballers or people that you just can't stand. And Scott made a point that Scott Brown was going to get nominated one of the weeks, but I think one that we heard in the last episode was Matt Phillips, and I think this is the one player that I've heard him go on about the most as to how much he cannot stand.
It seems strange in a way, because Matt Phillips has been quite a good player in the English Championship, and also he's been playing in the Premier League as well. And Andrew, you've seen him play as well.
Well, I've seen him. I mentioned in the last episode he tore our defence a new one. I don't know what year it was, but that often happens. But yeah, he was putting crosses in and all, so we got beat about 3-1 against QPR. And Scott was amazed that Matt Phillips could have a good game. But I think it was just one of those on the Scotland stage. He just didn't perform. Scott's seen him a few games and just chose that he had a strong dislike for him.
Yeah, so it's funny when you listen to Andrew talk about how effective Matt Phillips had been against Sunderland in that game when he was playing for QPR. Scott would often go on about one game in particular when Phillips was playing for Scotland in a friendly against Holland up at Pittodrie, and just how bad Phillips was that game. Like after 30 minutes, he could barely run, he couldn't pass, and anyone that knows Scott would know that he's not necessarily the most confrontational or aggressive person, but he was saying how he was out of his seat, hurling abuse at Matt Phillips, like shouting at him down at the side of the pitch, which is hard to believe, but he just couldn't stand him. He just couldn't stand Matt Phillips.
What was funny about that as well, Michael, is that after that, Scott, when he told us about that, about getting up out of his seat, he also said that that's the angriest that you can ever remember being at any sort of footballing moment. And it's just so funny, because I mean, like, Rangers have had a torrid time over the last sort of 10 years, and there's so many other sort of moments that I'm sure that he's been angry at, but it's just so funny that it happens to be that his anger was vented that strongly towards Matt Phillips that day up at Pittodrie.
In a friendly.
In a friendly. Yeah, it was in a friendly.
Yeah, one thing on Matt Phillips, every 2 months or so when the international squads got announced, even if he made the squad, Scott would start his rant on Matt Phillips again and how he shouldn't be anywhere near the team.
I remember seeing him against Malta at Hampden, and no, no, I'm really meaning no disrespect to Maltese football, but it's not meant to be that good, and you would expect Scotland to be comfortable against them, but the Scottish national team themselves, and also in particular Matt Phillips, had just a terrible game. The Maltese internationals on the field just had them in his pocket, and that's when I really thought to myself, Scott has a really good point here. This is a guy who tore it up in the Championship down in England and plays almost week in, week out in the Premier League in England, and yet he just doesn't turn it out for Scotland. It was just a really strange one. Although he did often get played out of position in his defence. He'd often get played like up front by himself, which really didn't suit him. But yeah, I think he's well worth being put to the wall this week.
So as a special tribute this week on the Backs to the Wall podcast, we will be sending James Forrest, Scott Brown, Stuart Armstrong and Matt Phillips all to the reserves, 4 players, which Scott really could not stand. So now I think we're going to share some of our favourite memories with Scott, and then a bit later on we'll hear from some of his other friends and people from his hometown of Langham as well.
So in September 2015 is kind of where our journey started, where we were all randomly allocated Essex West, the University of Stirling, and we all lived together for first year, second year, some of us third and fourth, and we're all still best friends today. And it was best fortune, luck, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, our paths may not have even crossed if we hadn't lived. I mean, I think we quickly all kind of became a family. I mean, it is just us 4 doing the podcast, and we of course have such a close bond, but it isn't just us 4 as part of this family. There's 20 plus people where we're all still so close, and it's like this one big kind of dysfunctional family, kind of, where we've shared so many great memories for the past 4 years.
And I think as well, going back to that, where it kind of all began for us in university accommodation, we all probably remember meeting Scott for the first time, and he was, probably 17. And that was his first time being away from home. He was probably quite shy and nervous, and very quickly became such an important part of the group, and somebody who everyone would have looked out for. There's just so many funny memories throughout those 4 years, almost too many that we can name. A lot of the time we did spend going to ridiculous football matches across the country, and Scott was often involved in those, and often would have been driving us there in his silver Ford Ka, which just brought a smile to your face every time you saw it drive up into university campus. And no doubt we looked totally ridiculous, all cramped into the car. But it's certainly, when you think about it, our university experience wouldn't have been the same if it weren't for that car. And at the beginning, Scott would have gone home pretty much most weekends in first year, because he loved Langham, very close to his parents and a lot of friends there, and was a big part of the community. But then I suppose as time went on, he would spend more weekends up in Stirling, and we got to kind of go on more adventures, you would say, at the weekends. And often it was just a case of Scott going along with whatever ridiculous scenarios or adventures that we were bringing him on.
We did go on some crazy adventures with Scott, and some of the time he would have to take a little bit of persuading. But when it came to the Toby Carvery, that was when Scott was in his element, and that's when he would rally the troops, and he would pile everyone into the back of his Ford Ka, and we'd always head for Edinburgh. That was where the closest one was to Stirling. We would always have a bit of banter in the car on the way there, and there was the game credit card roulette, which we always toyed with the idea of playing, where you put your bank card into the middle of the table, and a waiter or waitress would have to come over and pick a random card, and whoever it was would pay the bill. But we never actually went through with that. It was always a bit of a joke. And there was also another time we decided to go to the Perth Toby Carvery, and so we drove over an hour from Stirling to Perth, only to find out that the day before was the restaurant's last day of existence, and they ceased trading. So it turned out that we drove around Perth.
They were actually open, but they'd shut at 7 o'clock, and I think we'd got there just after 7. So we'd actually drove all the way to Perth, and then we couldn't get in, so we went to a Pizza Hut and there was a Pizza Hut in Stirling, so we'd done about to nearly a 2-hour round trip for a Pizza Hut.
Yeah.
He loved the roast dinner, like he loved the Toby Carvery.
Toby Carvery is the absolute dream establishment. I will not get anyone else telling me anywhere else is better than Toby Carvery.
I mean, I've never tasted Yorkshire puddings as good unless you're in Andrew Wright's house and his mum's been in the kitchen. I'm sure his mum and dad can testify to that.
Jamie consumed numerous Yorkshire puddings once at my house.
Many Yorkshire puddings, was it?
Well, I just remember his dad still mentions to this day, he calls me the boy who would turn round in his chair and take more Yorkshire puddings off the counter.
But yeah, the Toby Carvery was almost like a selling point to us. We'd pick a game where it was kind of near a carvery so we could go with them. But it's kind of just a testament to his character that he would drive us anywhere. Like, it would kind of take a bit of persuading at the start, but at the end he would always say yes, and we'd go to these ridiculous places all over, even if it was just driving into town. The amount of times we drove into town to see Michael, who was working at William Hill. I mean, we would go in, spend about £5 each on the roulette machine, deal or no deal. I mean, some of the moments we had in there celebrating winning £10 each on deal or no deal.
There's so many when it comes to betting shops, there's it's got a lot of, it's synonymous with sort of like gambling in a bad light, but for us we only would put in a few pounds each at a time, and we'd be in there for about half an hour just having such a laugh, and whether or not we won 1, 2, 3, 10, 20 pounds, it wouldn't matter, or we lost a lot, it wouldn't matter. We were having such a fun time, and Michael would watch from behind the glass panel, and I'm sure he was jealous that he couldn't join in, but he was still there for the patter.
It always brightened up my shifts anyway. When the three of them came in and often tortured me. But no, Scott loved the trip to the bookies, and of course loved watching the racing. Like, you know, something Scott and I bonded over was we both loved horse racing, and thankfully in fourth year the four of us made, funnily enough, another trip to Perth. This time for, I think it was an October meeting, and we'd been out the night before as well. So we were on the train, few cans or whatever, get into Perth, went to this really dodgy, well, that's maybe not fair saying this, but it was a little bit rough, the St Johnson supporters club we were in, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit questionable.
Yeah, a couple of pints there, and then got a taxi up to the course, and it was just such a good day, like, you know, having a few bets and having a couple of pints, and we ended up, me and Scott obviously were probably more into the racing than Andrew and Jamie were, but
I just remember one moment where we were outside the I don't know if you call it the paddock when the horses are parading round, and Scott clocked one of the jockeys that, do you remember who it was, Michael, that he insisted that we got a picture with him?
It was Richard Johnson. Yeah,
and so I don't know the first thing about horse racing. It really isn't my speciality, but whoever it was taking the picture, when he took the picture, it seemed to crop out Scott and get me in it instead. So I was standing with this guy who I didn't even really know, and Scott, who was like so excited to see this guy. And when Scott saw this picture afterwards, he was just so angry, but in a jokey way. He made light of the situation, but it was just so funny.
Yeah, I think that was me who took the photo. I mean, bearing in mind I'm probably at least 5 or 6 pints in at this time, and I remember them standing while I was facing the sun, so that's all they could see. It was just glaring sunlight over Scott and this idol of this jockey. One of the funniest things about this day, I mean, by the end of the race, we were doing like 2 pints per race and that, and Scott had put a bet on the last race, and he'd actually forgot that he'd put the bet on, so went and put on the same bet again. Lucky for him, it actually won, but, which was quite profitable for him.
We ended up coming away, Scott and I anyway came away from Perth with the money that we'd come in with, you know, paid for all our drinks and our entry and everything, and it was something that we would still have talked about even after we left uni. We were always talking about racing and stuff, and he was very proud of his dad. Tommy had an amateur career as a jockey, and Scott would always go on about different hunters' chases and stuff that his dad had competed in, and horses that had won races, and we'd go on and we'd look up racing post stats, and it was just something he loved and something he was very, very proud of. Even that day when we were at Perth, Scott wanted to get photos with all these people who were anything to do with racing, so he could show his mum and dad. He was just so proud, and it's something that I really miss getting to talk to him about. But Perth was such a day. It was probably one of my favourite days. I don't know about you two, but probably one of my favourite days at university. And actually got better as the day went on. The racing finished. We went into the little. It was kind of like a giant shed that they had a band on playing.
Shed come gazebo, and there was a band on who were playing just classics from like the 80s, 90s, noughties. It was just carnage, and I've never seen Scott dance like it. He just let his hair down, and perhaps he'd had about 8 or 9 pints, but I think he was in a better way than me. I seem to remember dropping about 3 pints on the floor. Scott dancing in that gazebo at the end is one of my favourite memories of that day.
Yeah, I think one thing that I'm just going to miss the most, just our general conversations every day. Like as a group, we would talk every day about just football or just random things and stupid things that we've done in the past. I mean, I remember one of the weirdest and most pointless things we'd ever done. We were sitting watching Manchester United against Burton Albion in the Carabao Cup or whatever it was, and no intention to go out whatsoever. I think Michael was already going out that night, so it was just me, Jamie and Scott in the flat, and Man United were absolutely battering Burton this whole game. I think they were about 3-0 up, and then we decided, since Burton had none of the ball, no shots whatsoever, we were like, right, if they score, we'll go out. And we all agreed on it. And in the last kick of the game, there was this almighty scramble in the Man United box. And then Lloyd Dyer just popped up, hit it in. We just couldn't believe it. We were all in shock. And since you've got to buy a drink by 10, it was already 10 to 10. So we had to run out of Scott's flat, run to the Tesco to buy a drink, and then run back so we could go out.
I think we'd also we'd made use of the Domino's pizza that was down the street from Scott's house that night. So when we were trying to down our drinks before getting the bus into town, it was a bit of a struggle. I remember that was pretty funny. But yeah, it was incredible. I think I remember the Man United actually put their third choice goalkeeper on just before they conceded, and he made some sort of terrible mistake when he tipped it onto the bar before Lloyd Dyer shot it in. So it was just a amalgamation of all these weird coincidences that came to light, and we ended up going out that night and having a great time.
Most of our the nights, there were a lot of nights out that Scott was very, very up for, but we did spend a lot of time persuading him to come, because Scott loved his peace and quiet. He loved nothing more than sitting, as was said, with his iPad, sport on the telly. But we loved like dressing up and going out in these like silly nights out, and it was always such a task to get Scott to dress up in these outfits. Bear in mind, they were usually ridiculous. And one of my proudest moments was Halloween, and the four of us went as flamingos. We got these flamingo suits, giant pink flamingo suits, and when we finally got Scott to wear it, he told us he was adamant that he wasn't going to go out dressed up as this. And the moment there was four of us sitting in my old flat at uni, like it was just brilliant. Of course, we had a brilliant night as well. But I think that was the last time we got him to dress up. The next Halloween, he just point blank refused.
Well, we did want to go as crabs and did go as crabs, so it was probably a good idea from him not to come, because we looked even more ridiculous, and the suits we had on were just impractical.
We used to also arrange what we called social events in sort of second, third and fourth year at uni, because not all the people from first year were living together, so it was a great way to bring us all back for a night out together. And we used to come up with random themes for that as well. And we had a sort of a still game, the Scottish sitcom, where you dressed up as sort of like pensioners, which Scott was hilarious with his bonnet on that night. But one that I remember so fondly was when we had to all wear turtlenecks. And I remember I got a relatively cheap one out of like New Look or something like that. And Scott had gone to the charity shop and he got this brown monstrosity. It was so thick, and the feel of it, I can't even think what material it was, but
It was
it
proper
was so
like
warm.
wool. It was like
It was
wool, and it was about
It's
6 inches
thick.
thick around his neck.
it was so wiry, and I remember at one point seeing him in the nightclub was Foo Bar in Stirling. That was one of the ones that we went to, and I remember just seeing him, and the sweat was just dripping off his face because he still had this turtleneck on that would have been suitable if you were in Alaska. But that was just my favourite memory from any social. I think was seeing Scott in that.
He didn't cope well with the heat in general, and that was one thing we'd always said, that we would not rest until we got him abroad in the really hot country, like somewhere in Spain. Where did he say he would go with us? That was the Faroe Islands. Faroe Islands was as far as he was willing to go.
I think he said he also had some sort of love affair with San Marino or Andorra. I think we could maybe have got him to go there, but that was more of a footballing aspect. But he loved those national teams. But the Faroe Islands was definitely one that he was willing to go on.
I think that kind of just fits in well with this witty humour that he has. Like, he would always talk about how much he loved the cold, didn't like the heat at all. Like, he would just like a perfect 12, 13, 14 degree day, nothing more.
Scott, however, when we lived in Stirling, although he didn't perhaps go to other countries, he did, however, have a couple of great holidays which he mentioned, or used to mention frequently. He went down to Jersey, I believe, and also Cornwall. They were two that I remember hearing a lot about. So he did get out of Scotland, put it that way, but not further than the UK borders.
One thing as a group we'd kind of always talked about doing was going down to Langham to see Scott, as he was so proud of the area that he was from, and he would always talk about his bowls, the common riding, and just Langham as a whole. And that was always a dream of ours, to go and watch him bowl and kind of see him in the game. But anyway, we decided it was getting around Christmas time to go down to Langham. It was just kind of a spontaneous trip. I think we were going to go, it was like a Partick Thistle game we were going to go to, but then didn't go to in the end.
Yeah, I think it was Partick Thistle were playing away to Queen of the South at Palmerston, and we decided in the flat that we were going to go to this game, but it was typical of us to not be ready on time. And by the time we got into the car out of Stirling, we were going to miss the first half hour of the game. When we were about halfway there, we decided that we would make a bit of a beeline and head straight for Langham. But
firstly, I remember, we had no idea what was going on in Langham at the time, or what was that, or if there was going to be an event on. We just thought we were going on a normal Saturday, and then we kind of drove in, and there was loads of people, there was crowds. We're like, what the hell's going on here? And then we'd notice people gathering around the centre and by this big Christmas tree that wasn't lit yet, and we were like, is this the Christmas light switch on? And it turned out that we just randomly came to Langham on this quite big night for the town. I don't know if one of you want to chip in of the events of the night.
I think we obviously hadn't told Scott that we were there, but we started taking Snapchats of the Christmas lights. And I can just remember, he then went and he had seen them, and I can just remember him coming out of his house just down the street, and he was shaking his head in the distance as he came towards us. We ended up spending the night in Langham. We stayed in it was above an Indian restaurant or something in some Airbnb, and went out for a few drinks. We actually had a meal as well, and then had a few drinks and went home the next day. But it was just one of the more random, and we got to meet Tommy and Diana's parents as well that evening, and kind of get to see where Scott was from. And we'd always said that we wanted to go, and like you boys were saying, going to one of his bowls matches, and we joked about letting off flares and stuff, and
but it was such a lovely atmosphere down in Langham. When we went out for dinner, we were chatting with tables around us. I think it was at the Douglas that we went for our meal.
Yes.
And it was we had a nice conversation with some of the tables around us, and then we were in some of the pubs like the Buck. Afterwards, we just had such great sort of banter with the locals as well, and then but also in our own group. just had such a nice night, and I'm just so happy that we managed to go down and get to sample some of what Scott was talking about for all these years, about how proud he was of his town and how wonderful it is. It's such a lovely place.
I think one thing he was always very keen for us to do was to come to Langham for the common riding is it in July?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
so
the third week in July, I think.
So I think that's something that we, although not just the three of us, but kind of the wider friendship group would love to do. Obviously, it's not on this year, but next year is get to Langham for that.
For as long as I've known Scott, he used to because I play the bagpipes and the whistle. He used to always show me the videos of the pipe band and the sort of the flute band going down the street. It seemed to be so I used to laugh and joke, saying that I'd struggle to get up early enough to watch the bands go through the streets, because they leave at something like 5 o'clock in the morning to kick off the common riding. But it was always it was nice to see the delight in Scott's eyes when he would show these videos of tunes like Rowan Tree getting played through the town. He used to also show us numerous videos of him riding up the Kirk Wynd in Langham. He recently got a GoPro, the camera which he strapped to his helmet, and it was fascinating seeing how quickly he could race up that sharp incline. And also the video would continue on up into the hills around Langham, and it's so nice to see, because it's something that Scott loved to do so much, and I feel really privileged to have been able to sort of share in his delight and watch those videos with him. And one of my favourite footballing day out memories with Scott was it goes back a couple of years now. I'd seen that Arbroath were playing Edinburgh City in the Scottish Challenge Cup, and it was being played in Arbroath, Gayfield, and I remember running it past a few of the boys, and they sort of dismissed it. But I used to try and push my cause, and because I really wanted to go. I love going to these football matches, and Scott, you could just tell when Scott began to sort of his mood was beginning to sway, and he was sort of warming up to the idea. So once we got Andrew and Michael on board, we were straight into Soupy, which he called the Ford Ca, and headed straight for Arbroath. But that game was it's usually, the stadium is usually synonymous with wind and rain, but it was such a calm evening, and we decided to stand with there was about 20 or so Edinburgh City fans there that night, and we realised at half time, when I think it was 1-1, that the game was being aired on BBC Alba. So I remember texting some of my friends and my dad and that, and saying, "Oh, you should tune into BBC Alba just in case you happen to see us on TV, just in the crowd." And I think Andrew did the same with his dad and Michael as well, and Scott wrote home as well. And the second half just took off, and Edinburgh City, despite being in the league below Arbroath, just sort of ran riot. And I think it was the goal to go 3-1 up. A guy called Scott Shepherd scored for Edinburgh City, and myself, Andrew, Michael and Scott were standing behind the goal, and Scott Shepherd ran straight into our arms, and followed by the rest of the Edinburgh City team, and they all piled basically into the stands with us, and it just ended up in pandemonium, and the TV cameras were panned right in on us.
Well, yeah, you can see. I mean, one of us will have the clip somewhere of the celebration, and you can see the guy, Scott Shepherd, running into Jamie, hugging him, and then the rest of them just jumping on me, Michael, and Scott. Like, it's ludicrous when you think about it. We were evidently with 20 or so die-hard Edinburgh City fans, and then there was us four from Stirling Uni just there to watch a game of football, and we were the ones in the main hug or whatever it was with these Edinburgh City players. It's just ridiculous and so funny when you think about it. It's definitely one of the funnier games, or one of the best games I've been to, for just something ridiculous happening.
One of the other games that I managed to persuade Scott and the rest of the gang, plus one of our friends, Ryan Kelly, to go to was was a Stenhousemuir game, a pretty meaningless game, but we'd seen that it was only going to cost us about £8 entry. It was Stenhousemuir against Montrose, but Scott needed a lot of persuading on this day, because there was I think Scotland were playing either Australia or South Africa, and Scott was dying to watch this game, but I managed to persuade him to come along with us to this game at Ochil View. And I remember sitting in the stands, and it was a cold day. The football was poor. We weren't having much fun, and Scott was just constantly checking his phone for updates. And Scotland at the time were beating South Africa or Australia, and he was just, I remember him just glaring at me with such fury in his eyes that he was missing watching this game for a terrible Scottish League One game in the cold. And it was something that we used to joke about all the time, because that game had very little quality, and he seemed to miss one of Scotland's better performances over the last couple of years. In this moment, I cannot remember who exactly Scotland were playing, but
I think it was South Africa, and they were beating them at one point. They might have just lost the game, but it was one of the better Scottish rugby performances that we had seen in for a lot of years. And Scott loved his rugby. I can remember. It was in the Six Nations. Scotland were playing Ireland, and how they didn't beat Ireland, I do not know. The amount of chances they had, but Stuart Hogg dropped the ball when he literally had no one to beat, just had to take it over the line, and that was another moment where Scott was just furious, so angry. Probably should have sent Stuart Hogg to the reserves as well, but he always said how he could never forgive Stuart Hogg.
Speaking of Stuart Hogg, just briefly, Stuart Hogg was actually, I think, meant to be at the Langham Christmas light turn on that night. He was supposed to be the one switching them on. I distinctly remember Scott telling me that before we made the venture down there, that he was supposed to be there, but for one reason or another, he didn't make it in the end. It seems a common thing with myself is that over the last sort of 4 or 5 years is that I try and turn all of my friends into Partick Thistle fans, and Scott was very much part of that. And I believe that other than a lot of the games we went to at Firhill, we did take a trip, myself, Scott, and our pal Ben, to Tynecastle in Edinburgh when we played Hearts last year. And Scott didn't like Hearts very much, to put it lightly, but I remember Partick Thistle went 1-0 up against Hearts, and Scott, who's usually such a calm person, keeps a level head. He was jumping all over me. It's just such a fantastic memory that I have of Scott. When Partick Thistle scored, he would get out of his seat and he'd give a good hearty clap. But in this occasion, we were right up the back of the stand, and he was jumping all over Ben and myself, and it was just pandemonium, because it just meant a bit more to him, because he just really didn't really like Hearts.
I suppose then moving from the very start of our university journey to the very end was our graduation ceremony, and we were all very lucky that the four of us, Scott, Andrew, Jamie and I, had our ceremony on the same day. So kind of all of our parents got to meet, and then we had the graduation ball the next day, and we'd rented chalets on campus, so we kind of lived there for a few days and got to spend a lot more time with each other, and then had the big sort of party to finish everything off after 4 years. So it's great to have those memories and all the photos and videos from those nights when it wasn't just us four, but everyone else as well who'd been there from day one. So that's something that we can look back on very fondly.
Since we graduated from uni, we all live so far apart, so it's such a shame that we can't meet up more regularly. And the last time we all kind of had a reunion was in Newcastle in January. I decided to rally the troops, as I was actually going away to Australia at the time. It was like, right, we've not seen each other for a while, let's all have a night out, for kind of old time's sake, and let's all meet each other, have a good time. And I remember at the start, Scott was having to take a bit of persuading to come, and because I think he had a indoor bowls game, and we all know how much he loves his bowls. And I was kind of pestering him, going, come on, come, it'll be a good night, all that. And at the end, he was just like, right, I'm coming. Didn't even play bowls. That's how much of a great guy he is. Just sacked off the bowls for us and came. And we always kind of joked about Scott getting really drunk, because he was often kind of one of the more sensible ones on a night out. But this time we were passing around whiskey and drinking far too much of it before we even went out, and we'd got to our first pub and we decided that Scott was too drunk, and one of my friends had to walk him home and put him to bed before we even started our evening.
It was quite funny to see Scott the next day, because he'd got a full sort of 12-hour sleep that we were all feeling a bit worse for wear, and he was pretty fresh, but it was all it's just such funny memories.
But yeah, it was such a fun 2 day and a bit of seeing each other again, just having our usual stupid banter back just for that short time.
I just remember every time meeting up with Scott, we just put the world to rights about Scottish football, and yeah, we didn't. I remember on the car down on the way there, Partick Thistle, I think, lost to Dunfermline. So as soon as I got there, Scott and I were sitting down with a pint discussing how poorly they'd done, and yeah, it just some things never change.
So those are some of our favourite memories that we had with Scott. We're now going to play you some of the messages we received from his friends and those who lived in Langham with him.
Scott's been my best friend since we were 4 or 5, and in that time I've never met anyone who was funnier. He was always there to lighten the mood when things were getting a bit too serious, and he'd always set the world to rights over a pint in the Douglas. I love him like a brother, and the world isn't going to be the same without him, and just being there to wipe the floor with you, playing a game of pool, or making jokes that are 5 years old and still just as funny. Yeah, we're all going to miss you, Scott, and yeah, I hope you're keeping his heat warm up there.
Scott's angelic face had the girls falling at his feet in nursery and primary 1, most notably Millie and I, who had a fight over him. So glad I had the prettiest umbrella, meaning I won Scott. I'm sure the primary 1 romance would only last 5 minutes, but our friendship lasted a lifetime. Growing up with Scott, we all got to see him grow, maybe not in height, but as a person. His wickedly funny sense of humour and infectious laugh had us all smiling. Propped up at the bar stool with a gin in hand, putting the world to right. His knowledge and enthusiasm for all things sport meant he was never shy of a conversation. Going to miss being able to talk all things common riding with him and encouraging him to stand for Langham Cornet. He was and always will be one of a kind.
One of the constants in our 12-year friendship was our annual argument on summer fair night. He would arrive late to drinks like he did every single year, and he would say he would probably come to the dance with us. And then as the night went on, it would become more clear that he had never had any intention of coming. And as more gin was consumed, we would argue over him coming, and he would sit there in his armchair in his traditional polo shirt and trainers ensemble, sipping away at his extra strong G&T, and I would pester him for hours, stopping occasionally to make him take selfies with me and laugh with him over a stupid inside joke that no one else found funny. And in the end, he would win our argument and weasel his way out of the dance, promising me he would buy me a drink the next day to make up for it. If I had thought for 1 second that this might end up happening, I would have fought so much harder to make him come with me last year. Scott was one of the greatest people I have ever known, and likely will ever know. I am so proud to call him my friend. Get the drinks in, Scott. I'll see you when I see you.
One of my first memories of Scott was when we were in nursery. We were asked to bring in something for show and tell. I brought in my favourite fire engine, and others brought in their favourite toy or teddy. It was a very memorable and exciting day for everyone when Scott brought in his horse for his show and tell. His wee chestnut Shetland pony Angel. He definitely upstaged us all with that one. He was one of my best friends in nursery, and we used to spend our days together. We would play our favourite game, which was bin lorries. Ross would be the driver, me and Shin would be the bin men, and Scott always wanted to be the bin. You were always in for a fun time when Scott was about. His wit and wicked sense of humour always kept us laughing, It was often at Al's expense though, like when he filled Al's bed with biscuit crumbs on a school trip once, which resulted in Al having to find a hoover and hoover out his bed so he could sleep that night. I will miss the way that he would turn up at my house late, wander on in and sit down in his chair. He would always pull a face when trying the overly strong gin and tonic I would pour for him, but he was always too much of a gentleman to cause a fuss and drank it anyway. The thing I admired most about Scott was the way he never took himself too seriously. Every time I was with Scott, smiling and laughing was always guaranteed. You were always there to keep us smiling, Scott, and the memories of our time together will forever keep me smiling.
Scott and I were friends for 10 years, and he was a big part of my life because he was Alistair's best friend. Scott was so funny and had so much natural charisma. When we were 15, he told me I should be wary of going to Alistair's house because apparently he lived in a cave set into a mountain. When we went to uni, Scott told me it was my job to keep Al on a leash. Scott would come to our regular meetups in Langham, where it would be both entertaining and calming to see his friendship with Al remain so constant over time. Scott was someone whom I thought would be in my life forever. He was a great friend and one who will be missed so much.
My first memory of Scott was being so in love with him. Scott never knew at the time. I got £1 pocket money every week and started saving towards our wedding, reaching a total of £10. Only to find out he chose Shona over me because she had the prettier umbrella. Although we never got married, we grew up together and I truly admired him as a friend. Scott was always very clued up on sports and politics, very opinionated, so much so that me and Scott had a debate where I had to face him about Scottish independence referendum. He was very passionate and left me with very few words by the end. Classic Scott. In school we used to joke that he would be the next Prime Minister. Our school trip was never dull around Scott. Every bus trip, Scott and I would take the front 2 seats. The time passed quick with our immaturity and his constant jokes. Every school trip, Scott would place bets on the estimated time of arrival of our destination, and the winner would get a polo mint. With updates every so often, I remember on the way to London he made the 8-hour bus trip bearable. It was always so lovely meeting up during the summertime, when we would all return back to Langham from uni, hearing all his stories and reminding him of some of his drunken Snapchats from Stirling. We would all try and drag him up to the dance at the summer fair night, but he always managed to sneak away. Scott was one of the gentlest souls. I smile thinking about all the times and the years we grew up together, and how lucky we all are to have had him in our lives and to call him a friend for so many years, leaving us all with smiles on our faces, and I'm sure he's doing the same up there.
My fondest memory of Scott would be back in 2018 when he won the Border Juniors singles title up at Spittal Bowling Club. He was also very keen on keeping the maintenance on the green. Last year the green wasn't looking its best, but with his hard work, and you look at the green now, it's what a difference, and that will be a big miss for the club. Keep up the good work with the Back to the Wall podcast and Facebook page. Stay safe, lads.
I don't even know where to start. Scott meant the absolute world to me. He was so kind, caring and honestly just hilarious. He was always there for me and gave me the best advice. Scott was truly one of a kind. He honestly had a heart of gold. I remember the first time we met. We just moved into halls and were in the kitchen together. I was attempting to cook pasta. Scott comes in and joins me at the opposite cooker. Time goes by and my pasta still hasn't boiled yet. Scott's full meal is finished by this point. It turns out I hadn't even turned the oven on. To my embarrassment, Scott had noticed, but I don't think he wanted to crush my dreams of being the next Gordon Ramsay. But fast forward to 3rd year, he was the one that always ended up setting off the fire alarm. So safe to say I think we were both just as bad as each other in the kitchen.
I think it's hard to put into words what Scott meant to us. Like, he was more than a friend. Like, he made uni such a unique experience, and it wouldn't have been half as good without him. I think favourite memory has to be when we would do, in first year we would do like road trip Wednesdays, and like I would literally sometimes skip class or like seminars, and I got capped just because I was skipping seminars to go on these road trips. There was one when we were in Dundee. We were up a hill in Dundee, like pitch black, or I think it was, and then there was one other car there, and we for some reason just decided that this car was like a drug dealer. We had zero evidence for this, but we just decided, and I think convinced Scott that this was the case. And then when we were driving down the hill, that car was behind us, and we all started freaking out for no reason that this car was following us, and we got Scott to drive so fast down this hill, like we probably wasn't even that fast, but it felt like the car was like tipping in that. And of course when we got to the bottom, the car behind us just kind of drove past us, because obviously it wasn't a drug dealer. I don't know, it's just such a stupid memory, but it's so funny.
Hello, Stu here. It's taken me really just a few days to sort of come up with something I could say about what my favourite memories of Scott are, my favourite memories with Scott as well, but possibly testament to his character. I can't really think of just one that stands out. There's numerous different ones that all sort of come together. There was obviously the time the uni put out an indoor bowls rink in the middle of the atrium. Myself and Scott played each other. I obviously beat him, and he was always furious every time I brought it up, which I made sure I did. That's always going to be funny, just remembering how just annoyed he got at the fact that he got beat by myself. There's watching Scotland games in his flat or in Morrison's pub with you guys. Just listening to him hurl just sheer abuse at Matt Phillips anytime he touched the ball. That was going to forever be funny. Some of that abuse obviously quite unsavoury, so I shan't repeat anything. There was the time actually he drove me home after an impromptu night out in Stirling back in September there. Myself, Scott and Jamie and Andrew were watching Partick Thistle get just absolutely destroyed by Celtic at Celtic Park. For some reason we were all there. It was just a ridiculous night. We ended up leaving there, going back to Stirling, having a night out, and Scott drove me home the next day, and I was just sitting in the car with him actually just talking about sport in general, football, rugby, and just even touched upon the sort of the antics of the night before, some ridiculous events occurring, as you can probably imagine. It seemed quite sort of insignificant at the time, that car journey, but you know what, looking back at it now, it's genuinely something I won't ever forget, because it was something we were just sort of sitting there both hungover, but just talking just for like a full hour in this car journey about stuff we both really enjoyed, and that was a really nice thing to look back on now.
I have so many memories of Scott, and it's difficult to choose just one, but one of the things that I'll definitely miss is just how competitive we were and having a laugh about it, like sneaking into the sports centre to play badminton, or playing the £1 million drop on the quiz machine in the Union, and then afterwards running to our cars parked in different parts of the uni to see who could get home first. One time we went to the races in Lanarkshire, and Scott was of course reading the descriptions of the horses and looking them over, to make an informed bet, whereas I was just betting on the jockey outfit that I thought was best. I ended up leaving with £30 in my pocket, which I thought was just hilarious, and Scott was just in disbelief because he was leaving with empty pockets. So of course on the way home I got us a Constellation McDonald's with the winnings, and we had a good laugh about it. But I'll definitely miss the competitive nature of our friendship and all of our last minute plans and adventures.
Scott was such a brilliant and funny person who I feel so grateful to have known and to have experienced university with. We shared the same surname, and we lost odds one night to change our Facebook names to Scott Natalie Morrison and Natalie Scott Morrison. Thankfully we found a loophole and changed our names back, but we both shared great pride in hearing of the disappointment we caused Andrew, who the next day was very hungover and decided to look up our names to cheer himself up, only to find they were gone. While our name changes were temporary, this is something that seemed to stick and be part of our greetings and goodbyes from then on, making it a lovely memory for me. Thank you, Scott.
Scott Morrison will always be a major part of my life. While starting university, he was and always will be part of my original group of friends there. What always made me laugh about Scott was his old man approach to life and his dry sense of humour. However, more than anything, I will always remember him for being a kind and generous person. He honestly couldn't do enough for his friends at any point, and I will always remember him for that, and I will always miss him dearly.
I think it's very difficult to pick a favourite memory with Scott. As a group we had so many together, so it'd do unjust to say which one's my favourite, but to me it's the little things. So my favourite memory of Scott is whenever we lived together in Alley Court, I'd have a bad day, it would be horrible weather outside, and I'd come into the living room and Scott would be there playing Football Manager, and you could just sit down with him. I used to sit down with him, and he was the one person in the flat who liked rugby, and I could just talk to him for hours about it, and he'd make you laugh and he'd brighten your day, and that's what really stands out, and that's what I'm going to miss, is just those little small interactions that he was so good at, and he brightened your day about them, and to me that's my favourite memory of Scott.
Scott to me was a friend. He was someone you could go to for advice, which he would have responded with a witty comment, a dad joke, and then he would have given his honest opinion. When I think of Scott, my mind goes to someone who can list the full stats of a horse in a race and then tells you who to pick. Someone who, despite all the protests from him, always was at the centre of what the boys were getting up to. Well, that was buying a scratch card and marking the prizes first, or being on Fubar's dance floor. My favourite memory that describes Scott to me was the numerous occasions of sitting in the library, taking a break from writing an essay, and he would have been sitting with the boys, and it just really showcased his sporting knowledge of, they would have played a game where they had to name a footballer, and then the next person had to say someone with the same first name or surname. And I remember just sitting watching Scott try and outwit all of the boys with just all this knowledge that he had, and then obviously he went on to do Backs to the Walls.
Scott has always been a good friend to me. He was there during some of my hardest times, always showing kindness. He was also a right good laugh that brought joy to all those fortunate enough to know him. Thank you, Scott.
One of the few times Scott and I talked, just the two of us without anybody else there, was during my postgrad year when a few of our main mutual friends were on study abroad. And at that time, most days I'd just go through the motions and do what I had to and then go home without really speaking to anybody all day. But this one evening, I was in the library looking for a place to plug in my laptop, and I happened to walk past Scott while he was typing up an essay. He called out my name and we just sat together and chatted while we worked on our assignments. And it was really nice to speak to him about how much we weren't missing our pals and how much lovely peace and quiet we were both finally getting now that they were out of our hair. Scott wasn't the biggest extrovert or anything like that, but what was always striking about him was his intelligence and dry sense of humour. I think out of everybody he could make you laugh, like actually laugh out loud the most with his cleverness. I didn't know him the best out of everybody, but I greatly appreciate the fact that I got to know him at all.
One of the last things I really would like to say myself is that Scott, genuinely over the last 5 years, I feel so lucky to have shared such special memories with him, and I really do mean this when I say it, is that he's one of the kindest people that I've ever met, and that I'm certain that I'll never meet anyone like him.
There's never going to be any amount of words or episodes we can do to show how much we love Scott. We just hope that this episode has shed some light on how much he means to so many people and how many people care about him. I mean, we know us three and all of our uni family are going to miss him so much.
I echo what Andrew and Jamie have said, and I'm really looking forward to whenever this is all over and we can get over to Langham and give him the send-off he deserves and be able to remember him in person with all our friends and give the support to all those people who loved him as well. Ultimately, it does help to talk about all these things. We've been so fortunate to have been his friend, and the world was a better place for Scott being in it. This episode and every future episode is dedicated to Scott Morrison, our friend, who will be forever in our hearts.